Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Felix here with your word on the street. How cool is it when we have a new birth within our circles of family and friends? I mean, you have new ideas, new hopes, new dreams. But have you ever thought about the new birth from the perspective of God the Father? You know, Jesus is God's begotten, meaning he is his one and only unique Son. And the emphasis is on unique. Jesus is truly one of a kind and has a relationship with his Father that is unique. I mean, like us, we're God's kids or children and are born of God. And Jesus, however, is the only begotten. New ideas, new hopes, new promises were what Jesus brought to the circle of God the Father's perspective for us, his kids. Look at what the Apostle John wrote about Jesus' birth in John chapter 1, verse 14. He says that, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glory of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth." The Word became flesh. I mean, that means becoming human. And by doing so, Christ, he became the perfect teacher. He became the perfect example. And he ultimately became the perfect sacrifice. You know, we're called to be servants of the Lord, to serve God's will for his glory. And by following the example of Christ, we see what we are to become. And as he shows us how to live, and he gives us power to live that way. And by Christ being the perfect sacrifice, we see that he was the sacrifice for all sin, not just some, but all. His death on the cross satisfied God's requirement for the removal of sin from the earth. And without that perfect sacrifice, we would all still be condemned to hell. I think the biggest misconception about the birth of Jesus is that people tend to minimize his humanity and minimize his divinity. But we must remember that Jesus is both God and man. When he was born, he became man. He was not part man and part God. He was completely human and completely divine. As Paul said to us in Colossians chapter 2, verse 9, before Jesus came, people could only know God in part. Yet after Jesus came, people could know God fully because he became visible. He was right there in front of them as the Christ. Christ is the perfect expression of God in human form. And we must remember that as we think about and try to fathom the significance of the Word becoming flesh and dwelling among man. Remember, guys, Jesus was his name, Christ was his title, and Messiah was his mission. He was fully man and fully God. He dwelt among men and was the grace and truth of God. John chapter 1, verse 14, and that's your word on the street.